I know they're doing their job right because the moon's right straight ahead, and that's where we're pointed. And, they're just going to launch us right straight to this thing.
NASA had great still cameras. They had beautiful film cameras. They developed and invented video technology to take great video eventually. But their purpose was really to document what they were doing.
If NASA suggested to take a picture, or it was in a checklist, it had something to do with geology, or something to do with looking at the lunar module to see what damage had occurred with the landing. There was never talk about, let's take pictures of having fun on the moon.
There was science, sure, like when they're picking up rocks and stuff, but it was other than that. When you listen to the crews that come back, they don't talk in nuts and bolts. They talk about what it looked like and how pretty it was. It was beautiful.
Charlie, it might sound corny, but the view is really out of this world.
They're out there shooting film in outer space on the biggest location in cinema history, and we'd never seen it big. What we had seen is the same little clips over and over again on a TV screen, which just minimized and diminished the grandeur and the vista of the actual reality. And I always wondered, what would this look like on a big screen? It was only accidentally that they got these beautiful images. I mean, that wasn't conscious or intentional on the part of the agency. What happened were astronauts who found themselves in these positions realized, well, this is gorgeous. And they would take some film for just out of the human impulse of wanting to document where they were at the time. And it was really, I think, an accident that this incredible film footage was brought home from outer space. The American public was sold on going to the moon as a political trip, in a way. I mean, this is the space race. We're in a race against the Russians. And overlaid on top of that was the science aspect of it. Look, all the stuff we're going to learn by going to the moon, and we're going to bring back the oldest rocks in the solar system. And we heard a lot about space rocks, or moon rocks.
The rocks were 3 to 4 billion years old. In the words of one scientist, the moon is very different from the Earth, and we don't understand it yet.
And they would film that rock before they picked it up. They would walk around it and they'd diagram it and they'd take all this footage of this rock so that the scientists back on Earth would then know where this rock came from. And the fact that it happened to be on the moon and you got the moon and the astronauts all in the same picture was just, a wonderful side benefit. And I always thought from the beginning that the most valuable thing that came back from the moon was these pictures, these images.
Okay, Houston, as I stand out here in the wonders of the unknown at Hadley, I realize there's a fundamental truth to our nature. Man must explore.
I was a newspaper reporter and covered NASA as a straight journalist. And in the process of that, this was in the early 1980s, I met some of the Apollo astronauts and was fascinated by the story they had to tell, which struck me as more interesting than the way the event was communicated at the time it was really happening. And I also, because I was hanging out down at the Johnson Space Center, got a glimpse of all of the film that they had down there. I mean, like, there's this tremendous archive of film that was shot by astronauts in the course of these missions. And I wondered why I had never really seen it. And certainly had never seen it in a way that was meaningful to me.
In July 1969, man achieved his historic goal. He landed on the moon.
I was fortunate in the sense that NASA was in the doldrums when I first got started doing this. It was after the end of the Apollo program and in the early days of the space shuttle program, which means that they had a lot of time on their hands, the people down there at NASA. I mean, in the film department, I would go down there on my days off or days when I had nothing better to do and just look at film. And I met Don Pickard, who was the senior NASA film editor, who had been there since the early 60s and had seen every inch of film that they had ever shot. and he became my guide to the NASA Film Archive.
When I first came to work here in 1965, they were flying Gemini, and the first thing I did was they put me on the Apollo. Where the other editors were working Gemini, I was working the Apollo spacecraft. The editor's function here was to take the film that was shot out in the field or by the crews and make silent clips at first for them to go to the press and give talks on what they saw, how they felt. We also made films that we gave to Congress based on what was going on within the space program to keep them up to date.
Vehicle concepts for lunar surface operations have been under study by the Marshall Space Flight Center and the Manned Spacecraft Center.
Once the Apollo flights started, it really got interesting, especially Apollo 7, which I remember well because I did the post-flight on that. Where Gemini, they were restricted for the length of the flight to sit in a seat. This is the first time they had freedom.
The film editors at NASA would basically respond to requests. Television networks would come down there and they'd spend a day, maybe 2 days doing film research, which means that they didn't have time to look at more than about 2% of the total archive. Don Picard had what he called his golden oldies that were what everybody was looking for.
The book I had that I put all the stuff down, I broke it down into like launches, what I thought was the best launches and the best onboard footage, like the separation on the Saturn V, and the best tracking shots and the best lunar surface, and then the best landing shots, and especially the shot from Apollo 11, the onboard camera that showed the dust kicking up.
4 forward, drift into the right a little. Down a half. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle.
I was the first person that showed up that said, well, I'd like to see everything else you got. And I had the time over, we're talking about a several year span of time, where I would periodically, wander down to NASA and just look at films. And as a result, we found a lot of stuff that nobody had looked at before.
The question now was whether the astronauts could turn their spacecraft around and control it to the degree required for future physical link-ups with equipment in space.
I mean, I had watched all of the news coverage of the Apollo program and found it very dissatisfying because it never spoke to what I thought was the central question, or the most compelling issue, which is, what did it feel like to go on this trip, to have this great adventure? And that's what we were attempting to do with For All Mankind, is to take people along on that trip. We had enough footage to do it. They had filmed everything. The Saturn rocket was the greatest prop in the history of cinema. I mean, we spent billions of dollars building the biggest machine in human history, and blew it up, sent it off into outer space. And that looked spectacular. They didn't build it to look spectacular. They built it for the purpose of sending human beings to the moon. But in the course of filming it with 20 cameras positioned all over the place, in case anything went wrong that they could figure out later, in the course of doing that, they got spectacular images.
It feels just like it sounds.
And so I just would make notes of the shots that most appealed to me, that I thought these were the best shots, these are the most interesting shots, the most beautiful shots, and fit it in there somehow, and try to tell a continuous story.
The real training came when we started doing the simulations of the EVAs. So when we I put our suits on, got a lighter backpack, and started moving the equipment around, going out, picking up rocks, we're using all the tools. One of the tools we had was our camera, and we used it just as we did on the moon. And of course, what happens the first day of training, or the first week or two, you come back for the next day of training, they show you the film from the previous training, and you look at it, they're out of focus, you're not pointing in the right place, you did this, you did that, they're not very good. So the next day, you try to do better, and the next day, and the next day. Pretty soon, you're pretty good at it. Now, That's not art. That was all science. I never thought about the artistic elements. If anyone had said these pictures someday are going to be the very famous and the most popular ones on Earth, I wouldn't have believed it. The camera equipment was never simple. There was no autofocus on them in those days, no auto aperture setting, none of that. And you didn't have a way to hold it up to your visor and sight through it. You had this mounted on your chest so that it was available anytime you wanted to take a picture. But still, that wasn't easy to do. The 16mm camera that we had, we never took outside. It was mounted in the window with a little periscope fitting so that it would mount flat and still look in the right direction. We were running at 6 frames a second in order to get everything on just a little film. So we turned it on when we were approaching the land, then we turned it off. When Pete got ready to go outside, I turned it on again. He went out, did some early evaluations, got a contingency sample, this sort of thing, and then I left it running when we went outside, and it got some of the other tasks that we were doing. Then we changed the film, and I turned it on again just prior to our launch. But that was the only time we used it on Apollo 12.
As you leave, you're leaving this unbelievably beautiful, naked charcoal ball out there in space.
At first, and they gave us all these little short shots, which were too short to use.
But you also got to remember that they had a very, very small supply of film, so they had to be careful. They conserved it for what they were supposed to shoot. But they got some good stuff.
We finally got the point across to them. It's better to shoot a longer take and be able to use it as a bunch of short takes that are too short to use for anything. And eventually that's what they did.
We used the 16mm camera some in the command module, and we took pictures with our Hasselblad in there too. But no one ever told us that I remember, look, you ought to take some pictures inside the command module, maybe throwing something at 0G or getting up in the tunnel and doing a spin or something like that. It'd be fun if you did. I guess they thought, well, it's not science, and if they want to do it, it's okay. They must have given us some extra film because we did those things, and yet we never ran short of what we were supposed to do that related to science and technology.
And they're going to the moon. They're on the way to the moon right now. Oh.
Anybody up there read me? This is Houston.
Well, I think that part of it was really great, was to see them doing spins and turns and playing with screwdrivers like tops. No, that was just part of them. If you knew them and you worked with them, you knew that it wasn't all just hard wired, this is what you got to do and you don't do anything else.
You have to literally just pinch yourself and ask yourself the question silently, do you really know where you are at this point in time and space and in reality and in existence?
When the guys went to the moon and they had these 16mm film cameras and they would shoot film and they were stored in the command module. Then they come back to Earth and the command module lands in the middle of the ocean. Aircraft carrier drives up, picks up the command module and puts it on the deck of the aircraft carrier. The technicians go in and divide those magazines in two in case the plane crashes, they don't lose it all. And these two jet planes then fly back to NASA with the exposed but undeveloped film magazines. They're developed at NASA. The original film magazine is then put in a vault for safekeeping, frozen, but they make one copy. That copy is then printed time and again, depending on how many times people want to look at a particular shot, to where what we had seen for years and years as the public are copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. What we wanted to do was go back to the original film magazine, pull it out of the vault, unfreeze it. Took 3 days to unfreeze a film magazine, and blow that up from the 16mm original to big screen 35 so you could see it the way it was meant to be seen. And they did a tremendous job down at NASA of taking care of those images. I mean, like, that film gets the kind of care that no film in the world ever gets or has ever gotten.
It's as if you're out there without anything on.
We're in Building 8 at the Johnson Space Center, which is where all of the film that's shot in outer space comes to live. It's developed here and it never leaves. And this is Morris Williams, who's the curator of the NASA Film Archive. How long have you been here, Morris?
I've been since June of 1969, and I've been the curator about for 10 years. And my primary responsibility is to protect that film that's in the vault because it is a national treasure. It doesn't go anywhere without approval, and we check it coming in and out of the vault so no damage can come to it.
Does it ever leave the building?
Original film never leaves the building.
Could we talk for just a minute about the blow up that we did? I mean, do you remember when we blew up our film?
I could never forget that. That job, yeah, it was, well, actually some of the stuff that Don found for that, I had never seen it before myself. So actually I'm sitting there doing the optical and I'm looking at it and sometimes you get carried away and you forget what you're doing. It was probably the first time that we did that kind of stuff on that scale. And of course, you were very picky with it.
What special precautions do you take to really preserve that film, I mean that historical film?
Well, we have a cold vault upstairs. We call it a cold vault. We keep it set at a relative humidity of about 30%. And we keep the inside of the vault about 12 degrees. And with that setting, that film would last 100+ years without being damaged.
I think the film is the big payoff for the public.
That's right. It is. It is.
More than the science, more than the rocks, you know, more than any of the other stuff that the politicians use to justify it.
This is our famous vault here.
Okay. How many numbers are you doing there, Morris? That's a big combination.
All right.
Ooh, it's cold in here.
It's nice out here. It's cold in there.
Okay.
It's cold. We gotta get it up off the floor. From one of the Apollo flights, Apollo 8. It's a great honor to be able to do this, you know, that I was chosen to do this in this manner. But you can't put any value on this. There's no value.
It's priceless.
That's right.
And S for ignition, Houston. Ignition confirmed. Thrust is go. Roger. Trajectory guidance and CMC are all go.
There's a whole category of NASA footage that's called engineering film, which was taken because the engineers wanted it. They wanted to see what a very dynamic portion of the flight looked like. In case anything went wrong, they could then go back and figure out why it went wrong. It wasn't taken because it's beautiful or because it's spectacular. It was taken for very specific reasons to help diagnose problems. Nowadays, when the shuttle blasts off, there are video cameras on the space shuttle that are sending live images back. At the time of the Apollo program, they didn't have that technology. They needed to get actual film back. And so they would position these cameras in the rocket ship, shoot it into outer space, and then the ship would separate, the cameras would come on, and they were programmed to run for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. And then the camera would eject the film, the exposed film, in this little film pod that had its own little heat shield. And it would drop back through the atmosphere, and at that point you're above the atmosphere, so I mean, like, the heat shield has to burn off so that the film doesn't get burned up on re-entry. And then this little parachute opens, and it's now 10 miles above the Atlantic Ocean, 50 miles out, and it's got a little beeper on it. I mean, like, so it's sending out a signal as it's dropping back towards the ocean. And these giant C-130 planes would be flying around. They'd have 3 or 4 of them out there towing big nets so that they could catch this little film pod before it landed in the ocean. Then the film comes back and they develop it and look at it, and that's how we're able to see it. And the best example is what's now a famous shot of the separation of the second and third stages of the Saturn rocket, to where they positioned cameras at the top of the second stage and the bottom of the third stage that would come on at the moment of separation. And this happens like 80 miles up in the air. And those cameras never even come back to Earth. And so that was all shuffled off in the category of engineering film that none of the TV networks ever looked at.
Ignition. Confirm ignition, and the thrusters go. You guys are really hauling the mail out of there. Oh, you better believe it. It's like we're climbing straight out, Joe. It's a fantastic sight, just like we were shot straight up.
I think in the long view of history, Apollo will be seen as one basic flight. The distinctions and differences between Apollo 11 and Apollo 12 and Apollo 15 and Apollo 17 are trivial and minor. I mean, what unites all of them was that they made the same journey. They all started at the planet Earth, they went to the moon and came home. There were basically 7 takes of the same script.
Y'all take care now.
The idea of compositing all of the lunar flights into basically one flight grew out of the film itself, because different missions, they shot different things, you know? I mean, some missions, they got really good stuff of planting the flag. On another mission, they would get really good stuff of the final approach to landing. The later missions landed in really beautiful places on the moon. I mean, like the first on Apollo 11, it was totally flat and looked pretty boring visually. But by Apollo 16 and 17, they're landing in the mountains, and they've got these beautiful canyons that they're in. And I always thought that you want to put that all together. Why separate it? We even used a few Gemini shots because they were so beautiful. I mean, I couldn't resist using them. Gemini had some of the best Earth orbit footage that was ever shot because they were in a higher orbit. Apollo never went above a 120-mile orbit. The space shuttle never goes above a 200-mile orbit. At that level, the Earth horizon is still fairly flat. Gemini was flying at 600 and 800 miles to where, like, you start to see the Earth as a globe as a result. And it's beautiful. And they had bigger windows on Gemini to where, like, the cameras had a broader field of view. And I couldn't resist using the best film footage we had. We tried to be historically accurate without being slaves to the facts and the details, because all of that information is available already and elsewhere. But there were a few moments that were critical to telling that story. Landing on the moon, for example. I mean, you know, all the missions they landed filmed that. But the most exciting landing was the first one, to where we used that audio for the most part. We used Neil Armstrong's first step because that's the historical moment. I mean, there's actually better film of later astronauts climbing down the ladder. And we did stick a little bit of that in there too. There were certain points of the film where you had overload, and then there were points of the film where you had very little, because we wanted to tell the story of the journey. Emotionally, I mean, like, the most important part of the trip was that. It was leaving the Earth and going to the moon and looking back over your shoulder the whole time as the Earth gets smaller and smaller. All of the astronauts talk about this all the time. And there was very little footage that would help you tell that story, to where like that was the difficult part of making the film was the journey out there. I mean, which takes 3 days in real time, and trying to find good images that would illustrate that was the biggest challenge of the film.
We've discovered that it is quite easy to... I'm surprised you all haven't set this to music. Well, you want music?
I went out and interviewed as many of the Apollo astronauts as I could. There were 24 men who flew lunar missions. I was able to track down and interview 20 of them. And I realized early on that we didn't really want to see them. I mean, like in a classical talking head TV kind of a mode. I mean, because that takes you out of the experience. And we wanted to just go on the trip. And I would ask them what they felt like at different points in the mission.
And I guess it was similar to the feeling I had on the moon when I realized that Dave, Scott, and I were the only two on this vast planet, another world. We were the only two there.
And so we just did audio interviews. I mean, like, also we couldn't really afford to film 20 guys at the time. This is a very low budget project. And that wasn't the kind of film that we were doing.
We've lost our picture here now.
What the?
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
I wanted drama in the film. It's a naturally dramatic story. Every single flight had something go wrong at some point in it. But they didn't always have film of it. I mean, like, they very rarely had film of it, because when something went wrong, they had to put the cameras aside and actually deal with the problem. And so visually what you had were these just little fragments. What we did in our film is just took all of the little problems that everybody had and put them all in one scene, to where our scene is really a composite of about 3 different flights that had problems. And what that did is gave short shrift to the biggest single problem that any of the missions had, was with Apollo 13. And they shot very little film footage when that was going on Apollo 13. And it was sort of disappointing that we weren't able to explore that any more than we did. Fortunately, we had opportunity a couple of years later to really go into that in depth. I mean, like, because of the documentary and because of my relationship with Jim Lovell, I got hired to write the script for Apollo 13, myself and an old friend. You could really focus on those particular individuals more than we ever did on any of them in the documentary.
That sounds beautiful, troops. It's exactly what we wanted to see.
Early, my hats off to the guys in the trench.
Coming back from the moon, we don't give the same length of time as we did going there, partly because we had already used all the good film to get there, and also because it was anticlimactic in my view. I mean, like, the journey out was the journey. This is Mike Gentry, who, when I first came to NASA, Mike was the still photo librarian, and he has since been promoted to upper management. He is now the chief librarian, known more commonly as the go-to guy for images from outer space.
At the time, I understood his approach, and I understood what he was trying to do, and I saw it as very artistic. That made it stand out from any other film effort that I'd seen at the time, and by and large since. I saw the movie with a group of NASA people in what was a premiere, basically, of the movie in Galveston, Texas. I sat probably about 20 rows deep so that I could see the reactions of the astronauts, who were by and large the stars, as well as the hardware and the inherent history of the whole program, and watch their expressions. And it had a very, I'll say the word poignant, effect on the astronauts, and they enjoyed it. They had no criticisms, and I had no criticisms. And I think it was a harbinger of things to come.
You get ready to eat, they'll say right on there, Command Module Pilot, Day 3, Meal 2.
None of the astronauts were upset that you heard, you know, one astronaut's voice when you're looking at a different astronaut's picture. Because, and I knew we could get away with it because they all spoke collectively of their effort, not just amongst the astronaut corps, but amongst NASA in general.
You know, the astronauts, quote unquote, had the right stuff. And part of the right stuff is not being full of yourself. And those guys weren't.
The astronauts have never objected to the fact that we don't treat them as individuals. We treat them as basically one group of people wearing spacesuits. And it was one of the best screenings that we've ever had.
It's all down there on that little thing. And it's so insignificant to this great big vastness of space.
Once space flight gets into your blood, it's there. You're with it all the time. I go out and I look up at the stars and I can see the shuttle and the space station go over. It's something that gets in your blood and it's just hard to ever get away from it. When I retired, I told the people who were there, you know, this is history. What you're doing today and what we've done in the past is history. And the people of the world will find out about it because of you and because of us. And films like For All Mankind that tell the story about what's going on, and it gives you a great sense of pride that you are a part of history.